CBSSports.com, and here are the top 5
Man,
coaches
who wrote this article?
on the hot seat. I think it's rude to have Mike Tomlin as number 1.
He shouldn't even be on this list.
He should not. He's never had a losing season. Yet, you know, the folks who put together this list will say he hasn't won a playoff game since 2016 and all of that. So that is the list on CBSSports.com. We're going to go through Liege's list.
Yeah.
But before we get into it, Mike Tomlin, number 1 on there. Come on.
So disrespectful. You know how many teams would be vying for Mike Tomlin's services to go to the playoffs every single year? Yes, it's a struggle for him as far as winning playoff games going back to the last decade. But are you serious? This dude doesn't even have a losing record. Why is he on this list?
And who's been his quarterback since Big Ben?
And that's been the biggest issue for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's always coached them to their ceiling.
All right, so we could go on about that for decades. We are not. We're going to get into your list, starting at 5 and then kind of working our way backwards to number 1. And we start in South Florida because Mike McDaniel, after going to the playoffs in each of the first 2 seasons, he was 8-9 last season. So why is he coming in at number 5 on your list here, Lige?
Jacqueline, accountability and toughness have come into question when you talk about the Miami Dolphins. And anytime that comes into question, you can lose a locker room, you can lose a team. When you look at what the Miami Dolphins have done over the last 10 games, in weather where it's 40 degrees or colder, they are 3-7. That shows that you're not only not physically tough, but you're not mentally tough as well. And I talked about the accountability aspect of it. Their leader, quote-unquote leader, Tyreek Hill, at the end of the season when things didn't go right, says, I got to do what's best for me. I got to get up out of here. And as a leader on the team, you can't do that. There's also rumors of guys constantly showing up late. I talked to Mike McDaniel about this at the team, the league owners meeting, and that was the first thing he brought up, Jacqueline, was accountability. Guys are going to be held to a standard this year. Also, they had some struggles in the trenches. Love what they did in the draft. Kenneth Grant on the defensive side of the ball, and Jonas Savania to really fortify that offensive line. But if Mike, McDaniel has a season like he did last year with issues in the locker room, this could get really hot for him this year.
Yeah, and there's the argument that the Dolphins can beat up on bad teams, but when it comes to beating up on playoff teams, can't really get it done. So Mike McDaniel is there at number 5. We're heading to the AFC North for number 4 because we're talking about Zach Taylor. I can't believe he's already heading into his 7th season.
Crazy,
I feel like he just got there, but it's hard to believe that this was the squad that went to the Super Bowl because they've missed the playoffs. Very slow starts that we've seen, and they just can't seem to pick back up steam when it matters because of those slow starts to get into the playoffs.
And Jacqueline, usually coaches don't survive 3 consecutive years of not making the playoffs, especially with
Marvin
a team.
Lewis survived a lot.
He was like the only coach. He was an enigma in the NFL. Usually, when you miss the playoffs 3 consecutive years, you struggle and you don't hold on to your job. And you see it right here, Jacqueline. You talked about it, the slow starts in weeks 1 through 13, and then you saw it weeks 14 through 18. They go 5-0. They have to do a better job of starting the season a lot faster. But the issue isn't on the offensive side, which we know that's Zach Taylor's bread and butter. But even though you're a head coach, you're responsible for it all. The issue's on the defensive side of the ball. You see it right there. They're averaging 27.8 points in losses. That's the most in NFL history. Until you can stop somebody on defense, it doesn't matter what type of offensive firepower you have. If you're Zach Taylor, I'm marching into executive Katie Blackburn, the executive vice president of the Bengals, and asking her, please, let's get this deal done with Trey Hendrickson. We saw even with him, we struggled last year. But if we don't have him, we're really going to struggle. And they're having issues with their first-round pick, who is the biggest boomer bust prospect in Shamar Stewart. He wants some language change in his contract. He's not practicing. So you're talking about 2 potential starters on your defensive line not participating right now? You're going to have the same issue on defense. If you're Zach Taylor, you need to talk to the front office and get these deals done with these defensive ends.
Yeah, and Joe Burrow is already saying, hey, pay Trey Hendrickson. He deserves it. Keeping it in the AFC North here at number 3, just 1 season removed from being Coach of the Year. We're talking about Kevin Stefanski, number 3 on your list. How is that? What a quick turnaround.
It's crazy, right? They went 3-14 last year, and for most teams that struggle, they have an issue at the quarterback position. And until you fix that, it doesn't matter what you do. Now, again, this is a guy that won Coach of the Year 2 times in a row, but there's been a lot of dysfunction and messiness with the Cleveland Browns. And if they were to have another season like they did last year, I don't believe Kevin Stefanski survives, even though you talked about it, 2-time Coach of the Year. And you see it, most losses in the season in Browns history. That was the 4th most last year. So they have to figure out the quarterback position. They got 4 different guys that are going to be taking starter reps. If they don't figure that out, Kevin Stefanski could be out of there.
So 3 wins in Cleveland. Cleveland, also 3 wins in Nashville, Tennessee for Brian Callahan, and he is coming in at number 2. What sort of season does he need to have with likely Cam Ward? We saw him splitting reps with Will Levis, but it's probably going to be Cam Ward. We know that. How many wins do they need to save his job?
I would say at least 6 to 7, right? Because they went 3-14. Obviously, they weren't good last year. They picked number 1 overall, and they had Cam Ward. Now, they've done a really good job of trying to refortify that offensive line and bring in subsequent pieces in. They brought in Dan Moore from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Going to move J.C. Latham over the right tackle. But they have to be able to be respectable this year. Let's not forget, they had a new GM last year, too, Jacqueline. Mike Borzongi. He didn't hire Brian Callahan. So most GMs want to be attached with their head coach. So if things start ugly for the Tennessee Titans and they finish ugly, Brian Callahan could be out the door.
All right, and finally, we have arrived to number 1 on the list. Not really a secret because the brass kind of told us that this guy was on the hot seat, and Brian Daboll.
The owner said it.
Literally going from a 9-win season to 6 to 3. It's just kind of been on a downward slope.
The owner, John Mara, comes out at the end of the season and says, I'm going to have to be in a far better mood than I am right now this time next year. That lets you know that's an ultimatum. You have to get it done. And just like the Cleveland Browns, the Giants have had issues at the quarterback position as well. They paid Daniel Jones. That ended up not working out. They have multiple quarterbacks on the roster right now. Jameis Winston, Russell Wilson. They drafted Jackson Dart. And the plan is for him not to play right away. But most people believe when you draft a quarterback in the first round, maybe that buys you a year. Well, history's shown that's not all necessarily true. Just look at the Chicago Bears. Matt Eberflus, right? They drafted Caleb Williams. He ends up getting fired midway through the season. John Fox, Mitchell Trubisky, he ends up getting fired at the end of the year. So they've really struggled on offense. You see the rankings right there when it comes to points per games the last 2 seasons. 31st. There's only 32 teams in the NFL. So Brian Daboll, it's going to be tough because when you look at their first 12 games, 8 of versus teams that went to the playoffs last year. So it's a tough sled for the New York Giants, but they have to get it done because the owner's already come out and said it.
Right, and a lot of questions about that QB room. We know that the pregame speeches are going to be absolutely fire between Jameis and Russ and the high knees, but don't think that's going to save Brian Daboll's job. Lige, we certainly appreciate it going through Lige's top 5 coaches that are on the hot seat. Notice Mike Tomlin is nowhere to be found on this list. Brian Daboll.
I respect the game.
Yeah. Coming in at number 1, Brian Callahan, Stefanski, Zach Taylor, and Mike McDaniel rounding out the top 5. Now you can see the CBS Sports version of this over on CBSSports.com.